Hi guys, Hamster here. Wanted to talk to you guys about scopes today. Those that might already have a scope, hopefully I can help you get a little bit more use out of your scope. And anybody who's contemplating buying a scope, maybe this will help you in your decision making process. What I have here is my Mark 12 with my Night Force Compact NSS 2.5 to 10 by 32 mil-dot scope. It's an outstanding scope. It's in a second focal plane. And what I mean by that, well, there's two different ways you can go on the scopes. First focal plane, second focal plane. Second focal plane is extremely common, especially at the lower price points. If you can get a first focal plane, I recommend it over a second focal plane. But if you get a second, it's not a deal breaker. You can work with it. Second focal plane, the reticle stays the same size throughout the magnification range. The reticle does not get larger. Whatever your target is, as you zoom in, the target gets bigger, the reticle stays the same size. There is a few disadvantages to the second focal plane. There are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. When using a mil-based reticle you can use for range estimation, the second focal plane is technically only calibrated at one specific power level, typically the maximum power level. On this 2.5 to 10, 10 is where this reticle is calibrated. Now, the reason they usually set the reticle at the highest power setting is if you're going to be measuring an object to do range estimation, you want as much magnification as possible to get the most accurate measurement possible. Being off only 1 or 2 tenths can greatly affect your shot. So that's why the reticle is calibrated at the highest power setting. It gives you the most precise measurement. For that is ideal. For other things you want to use the reticle for holdovers, not so good. Leaving your scope on 10 power all the time is very limiting to use for holdovers, because if your field of view is extremely small and it takes a long time to find the target, get on target, something moves, it could walk out of your field of view extremely quickly. So using the mil dots for holdovers for fast action shots on 10 power is not really that effective. Also, if you have a second focal plane scope, do you really know where it's calibrated at? Most of them come calibrated at maximum power, but that could vary slightly with each manufacturer. So if you have a second focal plane scope, I recommend you test it and calibrate it. And how do you do that? Basically, you're going to set up a target. At 100 yards, you need to set up a target with some lines on it, 3.6 inches apart. Then adjust the magnification on your scope, the power range, until 1 mil lines up with the 2 lines that you set up 3.6 inches apart, and then check that. And that may or may not be exactly where your manufacturer said that your scope was calibrated to, but it doesn't really matter. Once you turn the magnification ring and the 2 lines you set out 3.6 inches apart at 100 yards equal 1 mil, you need to mark that on your scope, and you need to mark that in your book somewhere so you have that information. Then your scope will be you'll know how to make true measurements, because if you're not exactly sure at the maximum setting that 1 mil is 100% accurate, when you start to estimate range, it's gonna drive you nuts, because all your estimations are gonna be off. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong, it's because you're trusting the scope setting was set perfectly correct, and it may or may not. Something simple to do, setting up a piece of cardboard with some lines on it 3.6 inches apart at 100 yards. Make sure you set it exactly at 100 yards. You need to be as precise as possible. Then just basically adjust your power ring. Right here, just take your power ring and dial the power up or down until your crosshairs 1 mil equals the lines on the paper. Then you need to mark whatever that location is on your scope, and that's where your scope is truly accurate. Now that will help you greatly. Now, something else you can do to help you quite a bit, it would really be good to use those mil dots in a situation where you have targets of opportunity that pop up, let's say at 1, 2, 3, 400 yards, and you would like to use holdovers instead of dialing up, because these targets just showed up, they may disappear quickly. you would just like to hold and shoot and be able to take that shot quickly. But we know your mil dots are only accurate at 100 at 10 power. So what you can do also is, once you've got your scope calibrated at 10 power, or what are your maximum power, while you still have the same board up, dial your magnification down to about half of whatever it was, and then adjust your scope again. Adjust your power ring, go down to about half. On this one, it would be approximately 5. And then at 5 power, if it's a 10 power scope, that object, that 3.6 inches would actually only be a half a mil. So then at 5 power, when you adjust this, and then you get that same 3.6 inches is a half mil, then you'll know that now you know where the second calibration point is on your scope. Now at half power, these would be 2 mil increments. So instead of 5 mils, this would be 10. So it'd be 2, 4, 6, 8 mils. It'd be 2 mils per dot. Each half of a line would be equal to 1 mil at 5 power. Where at 10 power, each dot represented 1 mil, or 3.6 inches at 100 yards. But then finding the location where I'm also calibrated at a second setting would be very crucial, because it would be very beneficial to me to be able to leave the scope on 5 power, and now these are 2 dot increments, and especially if you have a scope that has half mil marks, now those half mil marks are now 1 mil marks, and you will be able to use this scope effectively for ranging, or more importantly, use it for holdovers for quick targets of opportunity. So Night Force has graciously done that for me on this already. I was quite surprised. And you can see here, I think, on the power ring here, as I come down from 10, there's a 7, 6 mark, and where there would be a 5 mark, the 5 isn't exactly between the 4 and the 6. It's kind of right closer to the 4, and they've put a dot by it. This is the spot where they've calibrated the scope and checked it. At 5 power, this mil dot is also calibrated, but instead of 1 mil per dot, it's 2 mils per dot. So on 10 power, I'm 1 mil per dot, and at this location here, which is probably close to 5 power, maybe slightly under, it is equal to 2 mils per dot. And if you have a variable power scope, it may not be marked from the factory and no one's done this for you, you can do this yourself. You could dial your scope in and then find out where you're calibrated at half the power where it's normally calibrated at, and this will give you a really nice field of view. A little over 4 power, I have a great field of view. I'm still able to see targets, quite well out to 400 yards. I'm able to identify the target, and I'm able to take shots quickly just using holds instead of dialing up. So I can leave my scope dialed in about 4.5 power. I know my mil dots are accurate. They're not 1 mil per dot, they're 2 mils per dot, but I can remember that. I can know, okay, I can hold over here, I can hold 2 mils, I can make a 400 yard shot. Right, just like that. I can hold, 2.2 mils and take a shot, and I'll be right on. And instead of having to dial up the scope, I may not have time for that, if I'm under a time constraint, where I can just set this at a lower power. I have a much broader field of view, but I can still use my mil dots and put hits on target accurately. Now this is not going to give you super precision bullseye, competition type stuff. If you're looking to make hits accurately and quickly on steel, this will be fantastic. But if you have a second focal plane scope and you've never actually done the test and see where it's calibrated at, I highly recommend you set a target up at 100 yards, put some lines 3.6 inches apart, adjust your power ring until it equals 1 mil, check that, see if it's marked. If it's not, mark it, log it, and then go to the power setting that's approximately half of that, and then it should equal 1/2 mil at that half power. Mark that, and then that gives you twice as much opportunity to take advantage of that second focal plane scope. But again, I recommend a first focal plane scope. if you can get it for what you're trying to do. For the size constraint, they did not offer a first focal plane, so I had to go with second focal plane. The one thing I think is a deal breaker on a scope, if you're looking to purchase a scope, I can't recommend enough that you get the reticle and the turrets to be the same. And what do I mean by that? If you get an MOA reticle, get MOA turrets. If you get a mill-based reticle, get mill-based turrets. That, I think, is a deal breaker. I think that is an absolute must. I think if you don't do that, you'll regret it at some point, and you'll be spending money to correct that. This has a mill dot reticle, so it is a mill reticle, and it is running mill radian turrets. These are 5 mils per revolution, and they are in 1/10 mil increments. So I have the option to either just hold with the reticle or dial it in with the scope, whatever I want to do. And then being able to turn it down to 4.5, 5 power and still be able to use that reticle with that larger field of view, but still having enough magnification to identify the target and make precise shots and do it quickly is a very good benefit. But being able to find the halfway point where the second focal plane is also calibrated, I think is a big plus. And anyone with a second focal plane can do this. All you need is some cardboard, some 100 yards of distance, a little bit of time. Just adjust your power ring, take some accurate measurements, verify where your scope is calibrated at for 1 mil, and then find the half power setting where it's calibrated, and all your mil markings will be double. Just remember that. Whatever it is calibrated at for 1 mil, when you go to half that power and find the location where it's calibrated, the object will be half a mil. So half a mil object will now, this will be 2 mils per increment. The object's not going to change. You've still got your 3.6 inches. It's still set at 100 yards, but now it's measuring half as big because you're at half the power. But then now you know that at that power setting, these dots equal 2 mil dots. It can be a very useful tool to leave that set at that lower power setting and be able to engage targets very rapidly. And memorizing your settings so you can use holdovers or dialing quickly. I think you need to memorize your settings. Having a cheat sheet and having things on the gun, cards. These change, depending on where I'm at. These change depending on the altitude. I'll make up a new one. I don't really put a lot of time and effort into these. These are just stickers that I make up, and it's going to change with time of year, air temperature, where I'm shooting at locations like that. But you need to try to memorize your come-ups or holdovers, because when you're using the same system, the come-ups and holdovers are exactly the same. Either I'm going to dial up 2 mils or I'm going to hold 2 mils. It really doesn't matter. But getting the reticle and the turrets in the same calibration, I think, is crucial. It doesn't really matter MOA or mil. It's about like Ford, Chevy. It's personal preference. They both get the job done. But if you have the second focal plane scope, I recommend you do the test, set your target up, verify it, mark it, and then go to the half power setting of that, find where that is, and then mark that, and then you'll have 2 locations where that second focal plane scope is calibrated, and I think it will be much more effective. So that's all I got to say about the second focal planes. I prefer the first, but get your turrets and reticle the same, and you'll be happier and save money in the long run. Thanks for watching.